examples. So today we're going to take a look at a very typical use case in Giraffe, which is finding a site, drawing a design, and then sharing what your findings are with your teammates. So I'll take you through those steps. It's a really quick kind of 4-step training here. And by the end of the training, you'll know how to do all of the basics you'll need to get started with Giraffe on your own. So let's dive in. Here on my screen, you'll see a map of Minneapolis. Actually, I've chosen to use Minneapolis as my example today. The state and the county of Hennepin, which is where Minneapolis has really great geospatial data. So I thought this would be a fun place to demo. A big thing about Giraffe is that Giraffe's main canvas is a map of the entire globe. So everything you ever do in Giraffe is going to be geolocated, it's going to be to scale, and it's going to be in the context of the data that you add to your project, that spatial data. So I wanted to start today by looking at the spatial data in the part of your workflow where you're looking for a site to build something. So today I'm going to say, okay, I want to build something in the Minneapolis area. I have some criteria that I want to stick to, and I'm going to search for a site using spatial data layers that meets that criteria. So the first thing I can do is just click over here in my left-hand toolbar, and this is where all of your layers are going to live. And layers in Giraffe are the elements that overlay each other on the map. So right now you're seeing some very default layers, some information about, just street names and rivers and parks and locations, as well as if I zoom in a little bit further, we'll start to see our 3D buildings appear. I can turn on a satellite if I wish, if I want to get that more realistic view. All of these things are different spatial layers. And we start you off in every project in Giraffe with this really simple set. But with our specific use case of trying to find a site to build a development on, we need to add a few more that will be useful to us. So I'm going to do that by just clicking this data layer button here. And that's going to open your layer library. And the layer library in Giraffe has a collection of spatial layers from all kinds of places. So the first tab that you open up to is going to be everything, which also includes hundreds, if not close, maybe a couple thousand geospatial layers that the Giraffe team has found globally that we think would be relevant and helpful to the folks who are using Giraffe every day. All of these layers are open source, open availability, provided by their local governments and municipalities. So why not make them available to the folks who use Giraffe every day by just uploading them for you? And some of those layers that I always end up using, especially on a US project, are things like contours. So I'm just going to search contours here, and I like using this Elevation Contours USA 3DEP. It's from the USGS 3D elevation program. And then we also have wetlands from the Fish and Wildlife Service. So I'm just going to add those. And the way I'm adding these layers to my project is I'm just clicking this checkbox next to the layer name. And that's going to add it to my layer tree as soon as I close out of here. The last one I'm going to add here is our flood zones. And then one last one that's a little bit more niche is our USA opportunity zones. So I'm just going to add those federal opportunity zones to see some areas where I might get some tax incentive for building. So now that I've closed out of that layer tree, or that layer library, I'm starting to see all of these layers load in here. So the first thing that's loading in, you can see really clearly, is the contours. If I move over towards this river, we'll start to see the flood zones load in. You can see those starting to load in here. And then anywhere that there's wetlands coverage, you can see up here in this area, there are some wetlands areas as well being overlaid. So all of this data is really helpful because obviously, you can't really build a building on a wetland very effectively. Sometimes you can't legally. So it's good to see what's going on as far as the terrain. These sort of bluish areas here are the federal or opportunity zones. So these are some overlays that are identifying areas where you can get some federal tax incentive for building as well. So all of these layers I'm going to be using once I load in my parcels. And I actually want to kind of group some of these layers together because I don't want to look at them all the time. So I'm just going to grab this wetlands layer and just drag it on top of my contours. And it's going to prompt me to create a group. So I'm just going to call this group terrain for lack of a better word. I'm also going to add my flood zones into that terrain group. And what's great about this is that I can turn them all off now at the same time. And just sort of clean up my layers here, because some projects you might have hundreds of layers that you're exploring. You just want to keep that nice and clean. So when I was searching through my layers, I happened to not find by default the parcel layer that is for this local area. Luckily, I know that the county of Hennepin has a really great parcel layer. So I found that from their county GIS website, and I'm just going to pull this up here. So this is what's called an Esri feature server. It looks like nothing here, but the magic is when we bring it into Giraffe. So I'm just going to copy this URL. I'm going to go back to my data layer library here. And then I have this cool red create your own button. And in that create your own button, you'll see all the different kinds of layers that you, as a person using Giraffe who knows, where your data is for your local area, what you might need to add custom, this is where you can come to do that. So there's all different kinds of types here, vector, image. So if you wanted to upload a, for instance, like a site plan and trace over that, you could do that with just a PDF. But the one we're going to look at today is this Esri map server or feature server. I'm just going to grab that. And here it's now prompting me to connect to the map service. So all I have to do now is paste that URL right in here and then do fetch layers. And I grabbed the Washington one instead of the Hennepin one. So shame on me here. I'm going to go back, put in the correct one. And I'm just going to rename this layer, and then I'm going to click save. And now that parcel layer has been added. As it starts loading up, it's this sort of peachy colored overlay. In this format, it's not super helpful. So what's really great about layers that are in this feature server format is that I can now go in and style these layers. So the way I do that is go into Lens. And Lens is just a series of controls that let you filter and sort and style geospatial data. And this is really where the power is going to be for us finding that site, because in here we're going to be able to style these parcels by perhaps the use type. And then we're also going to be able to filter. So we can say, I want parcels that are, this many acres, have this current use. Depending on where you're located, that parcel data set might have all kinds of different information in it that you can use to search. So let me just first style here. And I'm going to style it by I think, yeah, use class. So here it is giving me a different color for every different usage that is identified in this data set. All of these uses are identified by the data provider, which is the local municipality. So different ones will have different values, but you'll probably be familiar with it because that's the ones that you're typically working with locally. The next thing I want to do is add a filter. And I want to build a development that's sort of, medium sized. We're looking to build a residential development. So I'm going to first search by number of acres. And I want to filter out all of this stuff that's like teeny tiny little parcels. It's not going to be useful for the type of development we're working on. So I'm going to do, is greater than maybe 10 acres is going to be my criteria. And you'll notice that as soon as I put in that criteria, all of the smaller parcels just completely dropped out of the map. They're not even there for me to look at anymore. But what I'm noticing once I did that is, maybe some of these aren't. Oh, here we go. I can go up here and we can see some that are maybe in an opportunity zone. So that's the second thing I'm looking for. Just visually, I'm trying to see, okay, are there any parcels in that size range that I'm looking for that are within that overlay that I find interesting? So I see a couple around here. What I can also do is just click on this parcel while I have Lens open and see all the information about that specific parcel. So as I scroll through here, I can see things like this is zoned as industrial. I could find the ownership information. I can see that the building on it was built in 1956. Maybe that specific parcel isn't super interesting to me. What about this one over here? And I can look at all of that information as well. There is a description here of that lot. I think this one looks kind of cool. I'm not looking at it in that much detail. Of course, you all are much smarter than me with picking sites, so you'll be looking in far more detail than me. But what I'm going to do is just use this parcel as my starting point. So I'm going to grab that. I'm going to set it as my project boundary. So that just set this outline here as my project boundary. And then now I'm going to save my project. And the difference here between when I was just exploring parcels on the map and when I start to save my project is that now I've identified this is definitely a place I want to do some exploration on. I want to save my work. I want to look into this in more detail. So I'm just going to give this a name. For the purpose of today, I'm going to call it Giraffe 101. And then I have all of this information here that I can now fill out about my project. All of these fields are defined by your workspace administrator. So it'll be different depending on where you're working and how you've set it up. It's really great because you can sort of customize everything to your specific needs. We've got a lot of example content in here. I'm sort of picking, random settings here, just saving my project for the example. And then before I start working on this project, I can choose to share it with my colleagues. The advantage of sharing it at this point is that you can work collaboratively in Giraffe. So you can have multiple folks working in the same project at the same time. You can see each other's edits. And in that way, it can be, highly collaborative. You can co-author your projects together rather than, Joe's going to do some work and then he's going to send it off to Tom, and then Tom will do his work and he'll send it off to Sarah. All of those folks can do it all together at the same time. For the demo today, I'm not going to share it with anyone, but it is definitely a good option for you. So I have now opened up my project. I can see that this site is, of course, right next to the river. So something I maybe should have looked at before I decided I wanted to build here is what is my terrain like here? What is my flood coverage? Um, Looks like it might actually not be terrible, so I may have lucked out a little bit, but it is important to understand these zones and know that I'm not going to be able to build anything probably right in this area. So I'll just leave those there for me to look at as I go along. I'm going to turn down the opportunity zones. And I have found my site. I'm pretty ready to go. I can start designing. So before I go on to step 2 of building a project in Giraffe, which is designing my actual layout, I want to make sure that no one has any questions or any concerns before we go along. So feel free to unmute and ask your question or throw it in the meeting chat, either way.
Hi, Harley. Sorry, it's Nick from Carlsbad. How's it going? You okay?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Just a quick question.
Yep.
Is it possible if you mapped out on Google Maps, for example, uh, can you import from Google Map? So say if you wanted a distance from two areas, would it work, or was what's stopping it from doing that?
So what's stopping us from importing Google Maps is actually the Google Terms of Service.
Fair enough.
So Google doesn't like its imagery being shown alongside other people's imagery, which, may be fair. They don't want the, liability of being shown with someone else's data. So they're pretty siloed in that way. What you can do if you've worked on a Google Earth project and you have it in that KMZ or KML file format, you can bring that into Giraffe as either a vector import where it's like individual points or as a layer. So if Google Earth, you can bring in, they have those sort of interoperable formats, but Google Maps imagery, unfortunately, you can't at this time.
Fine, but it will, if you pick 2 points, it will pick up the GPS on it and import it as a vector. Is that what you're saying?
If you have it in that KMZ or KML format, yes, you
Yeah,
can bring it to Giraffe.
fine. Okay.
Yep.
Cheers.
You would just do it the same way I just showed, where you do create your own, but you would
Yeah.
select the vector option instead of the Esri option.
Right. Okay. Fine. Thanks.
Yep, you got it. All right, well, let's dive in here and start designing our little site. So the first thing I kind of want to do is set up some constraints. And I'm seeing some items on this site that might cause me some grief. So I want to make sure that I am not intersecting with any of them. So the first thing I can see is this wetlands area here. And what I'm going to do is right click on it and just select create. And that's going to copy that shape into my project. And then what I can do, I can give this shape some different parameters and properties that tell Giraffe what to think about it. What I want to do is define sort of a setback area that I'm not going to touch. So I'm just going to give that thing the usage region, because it's just going to be a region that I don't want to deal with. And then what I want to do is set sort of an area around it that's even larger than the original region. So I'm just going to add a transformation to it that's called grow, and that's just going to make it bigger. And maybe I want to say I don't want to touch anything within 50 feet of this wetlands area. So I'll just give myself that setback of, okay, this area is 50 feet larger than that wetlands area. I don't want to touch that. And I can do the same thing with this water area as well, if that's my goal. There's, here, do my region, do that again, add my transformation to it, that grow transformation, and just set the offset to 50 feet. Now that I have both of those areas defined, maybe I also want to define my actual site setbacks. And I don't know the legal site setbacks here, so I'm just going to kind of make it up for the purpose of the demo. But I'm just going to, again, copy that shape. And the shape I copied was just my site boundary. And I'm going to say, okay, maybe I know off of, this main street that the setback has to be, quite large, 25 feet. And off these side streets, maybe it's smaller. So I'll do 10 here and then 10 here as well. And I'm going to assume that along the river, I don't have any sort of required setback. Common sense would mean that I'm not going to build right on the river, but it's not, I'm going to say it's not required for this site. So now again, I have this outline of an area where I'm going to define that as my allowable buildable area. I'm going to give that the region usage also. And I'm going to give that a, sort of very light opacity so that it's not coloring in my site. And now I have these shapes that are defining my buildable area. I want to make sure I build outside of these regions and inside of that setback. All of these items that I've drawn have been on that default drawing layer that just comes with every project. I'm going to actually create a new drawing layer, call it setbacks, and place those items on that drawing layer. So I'm just going to call it setbacks, select everything. I'm just holding down shift and dragging across them to select them all really quick. And then I'm going to set them on the setbacks layer. And the reason I'm doing that is because I just want to lock this layer and just not worry about it. I just want it to stay there as these are areas that I've already defined. The next thing I probably want to do to set up this site is to clear off the default 3D buildings. So I am going to, again, pop into my lens on those 3D buildings. We'll remember lens from what we did just a moment ago. And I'm going to filter out some of the geometry on this site by just drawing a boundary around all those buildings. And now any of the buildings inside of that boundary have been filtered out of this project and no longer appear. So they're not visually causing any issues here. With all of that done, I am ready to start designing. So there are a couple of ways that I can go about this in Giraffe. One way is to just sort of start drawing rectangles and then assign properties to those rectangles as I go. So I can do that really quickly with the R command, which is R for rectangle. And maybe I want to do a building that's 300 feet by 75 feet. And I've defined those exact distances by typing a number on my keyboard as I sort of drag the edge. So you can be very precise in your numbers if you wish. And now I've drawn this rectangle. It's exactly 300 by 75. It is geolocated in this exact location on the globe. But other than those two pieces of information, there's nothing about this shape that means anything to Giraffe or really you. So what we want to do is tell the software what to think about this shape by drawing it on the correct layer. So you're seeing now if I draw something on a locked layer, it is not going to let me select it. So let me unlock that, which is the whole point of the locked layer, of course, but want to be careful there with what layer you're drawing on. Okay, let me relock this. All right, so now that I've clicked on this shape, I want to give it some information so Giraffe kind of knows what to think about it. One way I can give it some information is by adding properties. So I can add a property like maybe its height. And I can say I want this to be 65 feet tall. And now I've got a cube instead of a rectangle. I can give it other properties like its color. And maybe I want it to be purple. You can add as many properties as you want to a shape to give it as much information as you need. But as you can probably imagine, if I'm trying to design an entire project with, tons of buildings, lots of information, individually assigning all of those properties on each individual shape is going to be super tedious and very inaccurate. So our solution for that is to use what in Giraffe we call a usage. And a usage is basically your saved database of building typologies. So you say, okay, for residential building, I want this unit mix, I want this efficiency, I want this floor to floor height, number of levels. All of those data points that make up a residential building get saved into your usage. So here, instead of adding an individual property, I am just going to select that residential usage from my list. And instantly that rectangle becomes a building mass that has, if we click on it, we can see it has 10 levels. It's got this kind of nice golden color. And what we can see over here in the urban tab is it also has a ton of data attached to it. And that's sort of the magic of Giraffe. Like, not only is it geolocated, drawn to scale, but it's also doing all of this math in the background for you that you typically had to do on your own in other softwares. So like counting how many units and, what's my FAR if I draw a building this size versus this size. You don't have to do that math manually at all anymore. Giraffe is doing it for you. So let's take a look here. We're getting our gross floor area. We're getting our FAR. We're getting our tallest building height, our floor to facade ratio. We're getting a count of how many parking spaces are required for this building. And then we're getting this really nice unit breakdown, even down to how many residents there are, how much open space there is, how many car parks per person we've provided. So many of these very commonly used metrics for designing your project are all included in the urban tab. What we'll look at in step 3 is building some of your own building metrics to really hone in on what's super important to you, your clients, or your company. But these are kind of the top level ones that we find are useful to almost everyone. So that's why we've given them to you in this nice report here. Now, I'm going to start doing a little bit more to this design. So, maybe I want to have sort of a multi-deck parking podium here. I'm going to sort of push and pull and have a little fun here and not do anything super manual or going for accuracy necessarily, but I'm just going to have a little fun. If you think of any questions while I do this, I'd be happy to answer those. And then in the next section, I will go into some more details about some of the other settings and ways that you can really optimize your designs as well. So while I draw a little bit, please interrupt me and ask me some questions.
Polly, it's Nick again. Just in terms of those metrics you've got there, so you've got 100% resin. What about, how does that take into account access to like hallways, etc., to access each of the units?
Yeah, so in this kind of block and stack style, we're doing it all by math. So
Right.
if I go into my I'm gonna just click on this and go into my usages, it is just a series of assumptions. So I'm
Yeah.
saying this building is 80% efficient. That means 20% of the building is corridors, cores, mechanical, other stuff that isn't, counting towards your areas where your units can be. And then you're telling it on top of that what your desired unit mix is.
Yeah.
and then what the sizes of those units are. So it's just sort of doing some blanket math like, okay, if I have this many square feet of available saleable area, let's divide that up by, 8% is this size, so 37% is this size, etc. If you want to be more accurate than that, you can. And you would do that using one of our sort of pre-made building design algorithms. So the really popular one, if I click on flow features down here, is our apartment algorithm.
Yeah.
And if I grab this, I am just going to draw a line, and that line is going to be the center line of my corridor. And when I do that, I instantly get this building that has a corridor, it has a unit mix, and it has some cores already set up as well. And I'll sort of optimize this a little bit here. Okay. So this is similar in a way to how this block and stack is working, except that it's much more visual and it's much more what you see is what you get. So
Yeah.
you have both more control and also have the responsibility of that more control by using the apartment algorithm. So I can just pop in here and look at the settings for this. It looks very similar to my usage settings where I'm setting the target sizes of my units, the target mixes. As I adjust this, you can see this adjusting around. And then there are some built-in controls in this algorithm to prevent inaccessible units from happening. So you can see like this triangular area here. Obviously, you can't have a unit there because there would be no window. So it's automatically been turned into a core. The other places that you're seeing this sort of dark brown are they're all cores as well. And those cores are pretty much anywhere it couldn't solve for a unit of the sizes that you've recommended, it just places a core there. You can have some more granular control by going into the edit mode. And in edit mode, you can really start editing exactly where you want things. So if I want another core here, I can just add another unit effectively and force there to be a core here because those unit sizes in air quotes are too small. You can also do things in the manual editor like adjust one side of this to be a 0 depth, which is hard to do in 3D, but easier to do in plan. And then, maybe your parking deck is along this edge of this crazy snake shaped building I've designed. So you can really have some more nitty gritty controls over this using the apartment algorithm.
Okay.
It is a preference though. The what you see is what you get is great in some cases and maybe too much detail in other cases. So we have both options available for you to use.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Ollie. Also, actually, just in terms of the going back to the really high level one you looked at, which makes perfect sense, that's probably easier as well with the efficiency. Are you able to break out the ground floor and the rest of the, because the rest of the upper floors are normally the same efficiency in our case, but the ground floor is going to maybe potentially have amenity space, etc. So obviously, then the efficiency decreases.
Yep. So what you would do is actually draw that as a separate piece of geometry. And I'm just fixing the back order here. So here I drew one using the amenity usage. And that amenity usage has a different set of parameters assigned to it. So your overall efficiency for the entire building will update, but the efficiency for those residential floors will be controlled by the residential usage.
Okay, makes sense. Okay, thanks, Ollie.
Yep. You're welcome. So some other fun things, I'm just going to draw with a couple of our pre-made flows here, just so you can get some inspiration of things that are available to you. So I've got this residential subdivision flow that puts down, basically single family houses here. I have one that lets you place down kind of a park with trees, which is really nice for filling in your green space. And all of these are just, default giraffe geometries with some transforms assigned to them, like we looked at earlier with the grow transform. So these are all just edits that can be made. But what's nice with all of these things is that it is all being counted. So like this park counts towards your open space requirements. It doesn't count against your FAR. I could set also some maybe underground parking spaces, and I will put them right under here, perhaps. And I'll get my basement area starting to populate because I've built something in the basement. So everything is counting live as you're designing, all based on those usages and parameters that you've set up in your template to be useful to your company. I have a question of how did I pick that individual level and turn it into an amenity space? And that's not what I did. So what I did is just drew another level of another shape. So let me do that again. So maybe I'm going to do a commercial building over here. And I've got this commercial tower. Maybe I'll make it super tall. And instead of selecting this building and saying, I want the first floor to be a different usage, what I'm going to do is actually select that usage that I want and just draw another floor that is that usage. I'm using the snaps on, so the shortcut S on my keyboard allows me to snap to these corners, so it's exactly the same size. And now I've got my bottom level is my retail, and on top of that is some commercial. What is cool in Giraffe, and this is kind of happening in the background, so you may not even think about it, these elements, even though they're two separate pieces of geometry, are still considered a single building. So right now we're looking at our areas by usage, but we could break this down by building instead. And you can see when I mouse over these, so these names are not very useful to us yet. We can make them more useful to us. But if I mouse over this top one, it's recognizing that everything in this group is one building because it's all sitting on the same podium. So what I can do is give this all a building ID, and now it has a more useful name. But throughout, everything that is stacked, it is smart enough to know that that is all one building, even though it is, two separate pieces of geometry. So no need to worry about that. It is calculating all those things in the background in an intelligent way. All right. Well, let's jump into some of the ways that we can optimize this design. So Giraffe, first of all, has a really great solar analysis app that is super helpful for telling you, is the direction of this building that I'm designing a good idea? Should I place my pool here or there? In some areas of the world, there are requirements for how much solar exposure is on each side of the building. So it's completely necessary. But the solar analysis will take some time here, and then it'll start showing me, okay, so which areas of these buildings are not getting good exposure, but also your landscape, which areas of the landscape are getting good exposure or bad exposure. So, that park that you're planning, make sure it's not going to be completely overshadowed for the entire day because that grass will never grow. So it looks like, a lot of the decisions I made were sort of good decisions by accident. But if I was seeing this and saying, okay, I wanted, part of this building to have more sun exposure, I could then maybe come in here and select. I'm going to stop the analysis so that I can select all of these and maybe spin them around another direction so that my sun analysis can be optimized a different way. So that's one way to optimize your design based on the tools that you have available. Another way is to go into analytics and start building your own metrics. So one metric that could be really important is the number of units per acre. So I'm going to build out a new category of analytics here and just add a whole new measure in here. And the first one I want to do to build that units per acre measure is to get my site total area. And you'll notice that site total area, we've only got square feet or square meters by default, but don't worry, we can make our own acres. So I'm going to come in here and do acres. I'm going to make my own unit called acres. And then all I have to do is some simple math for that acres conversion and just do my site area. And then I'll get my result of this site is 56 acres. Now I have that here. And now I can create another measure here that's maybe my total unit count. And I'm going to create another new unit of measure here, which is my number of dwellings. And then this time I'm going to bring in a property of the model. And that property from the model is the total dwelling count. Total dwelling total count. And I am just grabbing these components from this list and putting them into my formula to get my result. So the last one that I'm going to do that's really cool is I'm going to take those measures that I already created, so my acres and my unit count, and I'm going to do units per acre. This is dwellings. It's going to be B divided by A. And then I get my, result of 9 dwellings per acre. Not very dense at all because this is a large site and I didn't build a lot on it. But these are really cool also because I can actually even go further than reporting on just what's there. Maybe I have a target or a maximum. Maybe the municipality says you can have maximum number of dwellings per acre and you want to report against that. So you could put in your, max unit density. And this is actually not a component at all. It's just a number. And maybe my max density is 23 dwellings. I don't know. I'm making up a random number here just from the example. But I can do my density performance, if I call this. And then my measures are going to be my dwellings. Oops. My measures are going to be my units per acre versus my max. And I have my so then I get my report of basically how much I've got. So I've got, a lot fewer than what I am allowed to. So I can get as close to 1 as I want to. There is what the goal would probably be. Of course, your personal metrics and your maths that you're going to put into analytics is going to be custom to your company. But you get the idea there that the analytics measures are basically the sky's the limit on what you can think of what would be helpful for you to include there to help you optimize your design and also report on the important measures that are important to your project. Now that I've got this design, it's super beautiful, as you can as you can see. Sarcastic there because I have just thrown down some shapes. But I have, some information that I'm happy to report on. I have some buildings that I'm happy to show off. What I can do is start creating some views of this project. And one view, maybe I want to do like a top view site plan. So I'm just going to add that view. Give it a name. Just save it. And then maybe I want to zoom in on different aspects of this project that are important to me. So maybe I really like this little single family area, and I'll add that as another view. And save that view also. As soon as I start adding some views to my project, it starts to become really a slideshow presentation of the development. So if I click back on site plan, it's going to nicely animate these transitions in between the views. And you can use this in a live presentation with stakeholders, whether it's your internal investment meeting or with your clients or whatever's appropriate. But then, of course, everyone always needs sort of standalone PDF exports. And that's why in our portfolio level subscription, you have access to the report builder as well. And that report builder allows you to combine your analytics and your views into a really nice report. So I'm just going to add a page here that's a side by side, and I'm going to add my site plan as a view. And then I'm going to add that analytics category. And now I have all of these, density metrics that I created custom for this project displayed next to my site plan in this really attractive report. I'm not going to go into all the details of everything you can customize about reports and Report Builder, but it is highly customizable, I would say. You can kind of go crazy with how much detail and how you want to arrange it. And Andy's asking, how can we show multiple design options and how can we import specific unit layouts to the apartment tool? So let me show the first one. That first question is really great. I am going to, the way you manage different design options is through drawing layers. And actually, just a quick plug, we have another webinar this Friday that is on exactly this topic. So I'm going to do a full webinar on managing your design options and presenting your information about them this Friday. So definitely sign up for Future Friday coming up soon. But let me just show you quickly here. So I'm just going to add another drawing layer. I'm going to call it scenario 2. And I am going to, instead of, let's do this. Instead of this building, actually copy everything, paste everything onto scenario 2, turn off default. So now I have the exact same thing on scenario 1 and scenario 2, just for the purpose of the demo. I don't think you would typically do this, but I am going to maybe add more levels to this specific building, make it really super tall. And maybe also this one has a, giant pool for some reason.
Holly, did you just use like Control C and Control V to copy that and paste it?
Yep.
Okay.
And I use Control A to select everything super quick. And then, Control C for copy, Control V for paste. Your very, typical tools. You can also, there are buttons for copy paste in the more tools here, but, Control C, Control V is the quickest way. So now I have these new options. And if I turn off my scenario 1 and turn on my scenario 2, or vice versa, I said it backwards, you'll see that those changes were not reflected in the default. And now if I go back to my views, what I actually want to do now is just update those views. So I'm going to go to my site plan. And you'll see that the site plan, because I created it without the scenario 2 included, it's just showing scenario 1. But what I could do is turn on scenario 2 instead. Turn off that default. And then go to my views and add a new view and call this scenario 2. Now I can switch between scenario 1 and 2 in my views as well, and also use those in my report. So I've got my scenario 1 display, which I may need to update without scenario 2 in it. Yep, I do, because that layer wasn't there. So I'm going to turn off scenario 2. Go back here and update this. And then when I switch between them, it'll switch on and off the correct layers. So scenario 2 has the pool, scenario 1 does not. And then in analytics, I can also compare those things. So right now my analytics is actually just showing everything, which is, way too much added together. What I actually want it to do is split by layer. And I don't want to include the setbacks. So now I have a comparison side by side of the unit counts from my scenario 1 and my scenario 2, as well as the units per acre comparisons. So that can be really useful to have your analytics split out that way. Does that answer your question, Andy, before I go on to the second part of your question?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. So the second part of the question is bringing your specific unit layouts into the apartment tool. I wouldn't recommend doing it exactly how you've written it in your question. And maybe I'm just misunderstanding your question. But if you have a pre-existing building layout that you use over and over again, and you want it to just be sort of a template that folks can use, I would actually recommend drawing it manually, grouping it, and leaving it in like your design library template for them to just grab. The apartment tool is more meant for if you just want to slap something down and see what can fit and then sort of finagle with it afterwards. It's kind of, I don't want to say annoying. It's really finicky for making it match an existing apartment layout that you want to use over again. Whereas personally, I find it much easier, especially now that we have the split tool, to just draw my shape so I would have known exactly what the size of that apartment building is. And then using X on my keyboard, I can now just split the shape into as many separate pieces as I want. So like here, maybe this piece that I just created in the middle is my corridor, and I have sort of this, X-shaped building. And I'll just assign then the corridor usage to it. And then I can start splitting these side parts into all of those individual units that have already been designed. This method, I think, would be much easier for an existing layout that you want to use again to make sure that it's exactly right. And then all you would do once you have all those shapes defined is just select all of it and group it and call it like whatever the name of that building design is.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I was thinking of something just a little bit differently, like more a
Okay.
smaller scale. Like if we have a client who has a standard 1-bedroom unit that they like to use everywhere, it's, obviously we know the area of that unit, so that is, I understand how we would put that in there. It's really just a visual thing, like to show that unit layout almost as a background dropped into that unit type, if you know what I mean.
Gotcha. Yeah, you can do it. We don't have the functionality for it to be included by default in your apartment flow. But once you draw the apartment flow, if you add your upload image here, and I'm just going to do a rectangle, you can upload any image you want into that rectangle. So I'll just select some random image here. The Rita's Italian Ice logo. That sounds great.
Nice.
And then I will make it a landscape usage so I can stack it. So, and then I will stack that on top. And then you have that image overlaid on that unit. But it won't, it's not going to be part of the flow. I'd be surprised if that was on the roadmap, but it's not there yet. So it's going to be a little bit manual.
Sure. Yeah, I mean that's not a super important thing at this level of design. It's just something we've seen in other software, so I just wanted to see if there was a way to do it here as well.
Yeah, our goal is like the focus of Giraffe is not typically on going to that unit layout detail, although we do have other people asking about it, and this is how they've accomplished it, is by overlaying the image onto their design. So it's, I bet if I played around with it, I could figure it out. Now that I'm thinking, but you and I should think about that separately.
Okay.
It wouldn't come from the lightning bolt down here. You would have to save your apartment flow elsewhere, but I think we might be able to do it. So let's chat.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions from everyone? I know we are now 1 minute over time, but I did manage to hit everything that we were looking to hit in this hour. So how to find a site using geospatial layers, including uploading your own custom layers and sorting and filtering those layers, drawing a design using your usages and your properties, and some of the pre-made algorithms that we have, and then optimizing that design with all of the metrics in Urban, building your own analytics using the solar tool, and then lastly, building a little report using views and your analytics. So that is Giraffe 101. And I think with those tools in your tool belt, you should be able to get pretty far. But also, I'm happy to hang out for anyone who still has a little bit of time. If you have any questions, I can stay on the line as well now.
Thanks, Holly. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Very helpful.
Great. Love to hear it. And also, if you do have any questions or if you think of something while you're working along, you can email me directly at holly@giraffe.build. Happy to help. There's also this red question mark in the bottom right hand corner. If you click get in touch, that's going to take you to a live chat. So you can talk to us at Giraffe directly while you're in your project if you ever need anything.
Thanks, Holly. Very useful.
Yeah, you're welcome. If there aren't any more questions, I think we can sign off for today. So thanks everyone for joining us, and good luck in your next Giraffe project.